Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Week 7 Tuesday lecture. I'm so sorry that I couldn't make it into work today, but I did not want you guys to keep missing out on the content that we're learning, especially with psychological criticism, because it is so much fun. So, before you get started today, your journal number 9, and I'm not gonna give you 10 minutes like we would in class, so you can just pause the video and do your actual journal entry. But in the meantime, I'm gonna tell you about it, and then, like I said, just pause the video if you want to do it right away. Otherwise, you can come back to it at the end of the lecture. But you do have 10 minutes to do it. So journal number 9 is on The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Remember, the text is found on pages 892 to 93 in the literature book. Just to go over it really quickly, the poem reads, "Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." So what I'd like you to do is to provide just a close reading of the poem. Remember, go line by line and tell me what you observe the line means. Then think about who the speaker is and what decision is he or she trying to make. Then I'd like you to go through and observe what literary devices are used in the poem. Especially want you to pay attention to how Frost uses sound in this poem and how he uses imagery. Those are two really important aspects. He's also using rhyme in this poem, and you should look at how he uses that, and when it doesn't rhyme is important. All right, so either pause the video and write for the next 10 minutes, or you can just keep going and come back to it later. So we talked about Freud last week, and I want to move on to Carl Jung, who was a student of Freud. We talked briefly about archetypes in class, in my 9 a.m. class, and I believe we touched on it in my 3 p.m. class. So I wanted to go into more detail. This is mythological criticism. Carl Jung lived from 1875 to 1961. He was a former student of Freud. He believed, like Freud, he really believed in the unconscious, right? He agreed that was where, the unconscious was an important part of who a person is. But he didn't divide it in the same way as Freud. Instead, he looked at personal conscious, that's the awareness of the present, like what you experience on a day-to-day basis. Personal unconscious, and that's the past personal experiences, your personal experiences. But he also believed in something called the collective unconscious. And that is the images and ideas of the human race that we inherit. So it's the reoccurring things that are innate in our brain. He called it the psychic life of the mind, of our ancient ancestors. So Jung believes that humans inherit all of these images and ideas from their ancestors, which is a really fascinating idea. When it comes to literature, mythological criticism looks for the universal of literary patterns and images that reappear in different cultures. So why is it that a story written in America has the same images and symbols as a story written in Zimbabwe, right? Like why is it that these same images occur? Um, Also, the fundamental elements of human nature that are discovered through individuation. So individuation is coming into yourself as a from baby to adult, basically. It's like coming into your own in consciousness. It's like coming of age in consciousness, okay? Um, he believed that to reach this individuation, you have to come to terms with the three parts of your personality. The idea of your shadow self, which is your darker side. It's the parts of ourselves that we'd rather not confront, right? It's the things that maybe you don't show in public. So your persona is the part of yourself that you show to everybody. That's your reserved self. It's the forward facing self. And your shadow is what, it's your impulses and ideas that maybe aren't appropriate for society. And then your anima or animus is your soul image. That's the life force that causes you to act. So he believed that a balance between those three was important for mental well-being. We did talk a bit about archetypes. These are universal images that have existed since the remotest times in Carl Jung's ideas. And they come to us instinctually as instinctual impulses of knowledge. So the reason why these reoccur is in literature, throughout literature, is because they're part of our collective unconscious, right? They're reoccurring ideas that are part of that. And the big ones are the hero, the scapegoat, the outcast, the devil, the good mother, the temptress, the spiritual ideal, the unfaithful wife, the trickster. We talked about in class how probably you could also say the unfaithful husband, right? The trickster, images such as colors, numbers, water, gardens, circles, and the sun, right? And the quest is a really famous archetype, often involving the hero, death and rebirth, and initiation. Now, it's important that you go through in the book and look at all these definitions because you're expected to be able to apply them to the different, to all of our different, to our story. Sorry, you guys, my brain is so tired. To the to the short story, and then also to the poem. Okay. The last thing we're going to talk about in regards to psychological criticism are Northrop Frye and his take on mythological criticism, and Jacques Lacan's French psychoanalysis. And we will be coming back to Lacan when we go into deconstruction. So that's at the end of the semester. So it's good to pay attention to Lacan now, but know we'll be coming back to him. Especially, we're going to be, I'm not talking about a lot about the sign and signifier because we come back to that in the end. But we'll talk about that in a second. So Northrop Frye continued on Jung's work on archetypes in regard to literature. He really focused on literature itself rather than just psychological ideas. His famous text is called The Anatomy of Criticism, which was a hugely influential work, and it's still influential, yet it's a little outdated at this point. But he argued in that book that myths are the basis of all text. And he said that all texts are part of a central unifying myth that are analogous with the seasons. So the mythoi are the four narrative patterns that exhibit the structured principles of the various genres. So mythoi make up the monomyth. So the monomyth is the entire body of literature, but the mythoi make that up. And there are four different ones. There is the comedy, which is somehow associated with the season of spring. There's romance, which is associated with summer, birth, and innocence. There's tragedy, which is associated with autumn, and there's satire, which is associated with winter. So it's important that you really review those different. Sorry, for some reason all my emails coming in. You review all of those different things, the mythoid and the monomyth, as a way to group things, right? In addition to that, I want you to think about Lacan, who updated many of Freud's ideas. He defined unconscious as the core of our beings. And he thought that healthy adult psyches, it wasn't healthy for an adult psyche to be totally balanced, right? As a healthy adult, your psyche is going to be fraught with fragmentation, right? And our journey toward adulthood involves 3 stages. The real, which is based on need, the imaginary, which is based on demand, and the symbolic, which is based on desire. The real order is where an infant starts. It's when an infant doesn't recognize how it's different from the other people in its life, right? Infant doesn't acknowledge or understand that it's different from its mother or father. And that it's driven completely by need. Like if a baby needs something, it cries, right? And then it gets what it needs. It just recognizes when it needs something. Then the mirror stage occurs between 6 and 18 months, and the baby starts to recognize its difference from other people. It sees itself in the mirror and accepts that that there's another self. There's the other self, right? That's in the mirror. That's the what's being reflected there is the other part of the self. And with this acceptance of that the baby is its own person, comes this loss of unity with other people. The child enters the imaginary order, which you'll remember is based on demand, right? Unity with others is lost, and one can only perceive oneself in bits and pieces. Like when you look, you can see, you can recognize that you have eyes, right? The reflection in the mirror is thought of as real, and the child uses it to develop his or her ego or sense of self. But it's fragmented. It doesn't grow into a whole thing for a while. And the self one sees in the mirror is the other self versus what exists outside of the self, and that is capital O, other. The symbolic order is the last stage when the child is introduced to language. That's when it can understand that everything is separate, right? And that there are, like, if the child sees a cup, it recognizes that it is a cup. It is not a part of the child. It is not a part of others. It is its own being, its own thing. And that's why the idea of a word being placed with that thing is possible for the child to understand, right? A cup is associated with the word CUP, and that the child can understand the connection between those two things. Also, in this stage, in the symbolic order, the child starts to place limits on desires, right? The societal framework is set in place, right? And the child can start to understand that he or she can't just act on need or demand, or just based on desire, that there has to be it has to be within societal order to express it. Now, I know this is a lot to throw at you, just on a lecture where you can't ask any questions. So I know if you have questions after listening about these three different areas, please shoot me an email. I will be on email even though I'm sick. I will answer your questions, okay? What I would like you to do as homework, and I will post this as an assignment in our online class, is I'd like you to practice reading like a psychological critic. And you're not going to do it in small groups. You're going to do it individually because I don't know how to do it in small groups online. But I'd like you to look at the poem, Frost's poem, and I'd like you to answer the next 7 questions. Where do you see the appearance of real, imaginary, and symbolic orders? How do they demonstrate the fragmented nature of self? Are there instances where the imaginary interrupts the symbolic order? Is the character aware of the lack or absence of something significant in the self? Are there objects that symbolize what is missing or lacking? Do you find examples of the mirror stage of the developing psyche? Is the text an anti-realist, one that subverts traditional storytelling? So I'd like you to think about that. I'd like you to think about these questions based on the poem, and post your answers. Just type them up into the computer and turn them in by class on Thursday, okay? Whether you're in the 9 o'clock class or the 3 o'clock class. This is a recap of all the terminology that I've gone over in this lecture and in the lectures I've given in class in regards to psychological criticism. It's your job to really think about what all these mean and be really ready to use them when we have our fishbowl on Thursday. So our fishbowl will be on Thursday. Your homework, in addition to doing your in-class, would have been your in-class work today, I'm assigning these questions for the fishbowl number 2. You will be studying the text, Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been, and The Road Not Taken. These are the texts that we've already gone over, although we haven't spent a lot of time on The Road Not Taken. What I would like you to do is go through these texts and answer these questions, write up your answers to these questions, come prepared in fishbowl to really answer them using evidence from the text and using terminology, both literary, fictional, poetic, and the psychological terminology. There's a lot of it, so you can score so many points. All right, so here are the questions. There's 8 questions. 1, what are the main characters or speakers' main traits, and how are these traits revealed? How does the character change over the course of the story or poem? How does the character speak or view? How does the character or speaker view herself or himself? Reveal what is happening in the protagonist and speaker's unconscious as suggested by images, symbols, or interior monologues found in these texts. How do characters follow or vary from well-established patterns of behavior or recreate well-known figures from literary history? Use archetypes to discuss. Locate any instances where the collective unconscious of a character is revealed, perhaps through a dream or a vision. Is the character aware of the lack or absence of something significant in the self? Are there objects that symbolize what is missing or lacking? Do you find examples of the mirror stage of the developing psyche? Identify any archetypal images and situations and explain how to work together to create meaning. Examine instances in which the persona, anima, animus, and shadow of a character are revealed, including instances of rejection and projection. Alright guys, that's it for the lecture. I tried to keep it brief. If you have any questions, please just contact me via email, like I said. Otherwise, I will see you guys on Thursday for Fishbowl. If you have questions whether or not you're in the fishbowl, just look on our online in our class, and it's listed there. All right, guys, take care, and I'll see you guys on Thursday.